Okay, so I want to speak here about what I call the underdog fallacy. So what is it? It is a way of looking at society where you sort of boil every situation and every issue down to looking at which party of, we'll say two parties, which of those parties is more privileged, so called, and which party is less privileged, all right? So this is where the whole idea of underdog comes in. All right. So if you've any two parties in a situation and an issue, you're always going to have one that maybe is a bit better off or is a higher status within society, um, you know, or is considered maybe more powerful, that kind of thing. Okay. So the underdog fallacy, or another way of looking at it, is oppressor oppressed, the oppressor oppressed dialectic. So this way of looking at society comes from Marx. Okay, it's Marxian theory, you could say, but initially it was used to describe class. Okay, that was Marx's that was what his intention of using this initially. It was to describe society in terms of class, and it was the bourgeoisie, and then there was the proletariat. All right, and the bourgeoisie were oppressing the proletariat, as we were told. All right, now that kind of concept is, I mean, there is some legitimacy to that in today's society as well. But the problem has been that that same way of looking at society, oppressor oppressed, has been has been brought to bear on multiple different modern day social issues. All right, so you can think of any situation. You can think of mass immigration. You can think in terms of everything to do with LGBT. Think in terms of what else? Even in terms of, say, climate change. There's always a situation where you can look and see, okay, who are the more so-called privileged people within this paradigm, within this dialectic, and who are the people who are considered to be less well off or less privileged, or the underdog. All right. So this kind of simplistic, dumbed down way of looking at society has unfortunately taken hold and has become pretty much the go-to way of looking at issues within modern society. All right. With the result that, let's say, mass immigration. Okay. With the whole mass immigration issue, whether that be legal immigration or whether that be all of the, say, backdoor immigration routes into Western countries, for instance, like Ireland, whether that be the whole refugees situation or whether that be all of the asylum, so-called supposed asylum seekers coming to our shores as well. The only way that we are kind of told that we can look at a situation is, again, through that paradigm, that prism of who is the more so-called privileged party and who is the least privileged or the least well-off party. And within that framing, obviously, Europeans and Irish people will almost always be considered to be the more privileged, all right? And hence, our well-being, our concerns, our wishes, our opinions are not as valid or not as important as that of the other party, the underdog party, which will be, for instance, people presenting as asylum seekers or people coming in as refugees or even just standard immigrants, okay? Standard legal immigrants, all right? They will always be seen to be the least privileged, to be the underdog compared to Irish people, because why would you be coming to Ireland in the first place anyway? In almost all cases, it's for economic betterment. You're coming to a place where you're going to earn more, either through, we'll say, standard legitimate means of getting a job or via the welfare system, all right? Hence, the people coming in are always going to be the underdog, all right? So within that framing, you have to consider them and their well-being and what they want ahead of what the likes of you or I want, okay? The Irish person, who has a reasonable standard of living in comparison, all right, and has a first world country, you could say, okay, and has the opportunity to earn a living legitimately and to not have to worry, generally speaking, about your safety for the most part, anyway, and so on. Okay, the benefits of living in a first world country compared to someone who's coming from, in most cases, what would be. It might also be a first world country, but it's a less well off first world country, like we'll say Poland. Okay, someone coming from Poland to Ireland. Poland is first world country as well. I think most people would agree. But it's not, in general, the standard of living, the wages and so on, won't be less than Ireland. So people coming in from there, again, you would be considering the Polish people as underdogs compared to Ireland within that framing, okay? And that framing, like I said, has become pretty much the standard way of looking at issues like mass immigration and everything associated with it, like like refugees and asylum seekers, and so on. And, LGBT, everything to do with that. The gay person, the trans person is seen as the underdog compared to the heterosexual person. And this is, this whole way of framing situations has really led to it's led to a complete warping of common sense. That you can't look at situations in a reasonable, sensible, balanced way. You must always look, first of all, at who is the least privileged party within this paradigm, okay, within this dialectic. All right. So in this case, the gay person, the trans person, the immigrant, the Muslim, of course, would be another example. Compared to people who are from a Christian heritage country like Ireland, or some would say secular, but historically Ireland, of course, is not a Muslim country. Hence, someone coming in from another country who's Muslim would be perceived as the less privileged party in general coming into Ireland. Hence, we must see what we can do to look out for them. And even if that's not good for us, that in a way that doesn't matter. Like, we look after that party, the least privileged. We look after the underdog first, and we'll make sure they're okay. And like I said, even if that harms the well-being and the safety and the social cohesion of the other party within that dialectic, the Irish person, or the heterosexual person, perhaps, or it could be, what else could it be? A person of Catholic or Christian heritage, would be seen as the more privileged party within that dialectic. This is the way it works, and that is not to denigrate, any one individual, gay person or immigrant or Islam, Muslim person, whatever. It is just, I'm pointing out just how this works. All right. So within this framing, you're never going to get a balanced way of looking at society. You're never going to get a balanced treatment of these issues. And this is the danger of this. But this is why you have people like, I'm just going to give an example of Paul Murphy, for instance, right? Now, there's a good friend of mine who's in a situation where her and her partner's apartment is suffering from what's called fire safety defects. All right, this is on the outskirts of Dublin. Now, various politicians have gotten board, and they're trying to ensure the government comes up with a package to look after those people. All right, that's taken a lot of work, a lot of effort over many months, even getting into the last year or two now. And Paul Murphy has been one of the foremost people looking out for the needs of those people within those apartments. Now, the people from those apartments, you're talking from the mid-2000s pretty much. It might even go back pre-2000, but you're pretty much talking at least 20 years, and it could be 25 years even, of people whose apartments were built back then and sold back then, and that would have been predominantly to Irish people. And really only in the last, say, 10 years or so would those apartments would have been going more so, as time went on, more so to immigrants, right? So the majority, I would say the significant majority of those people in that situation with those fire safety defect issues are Irish people, all right? Now, Paul Murphy has gone to significant lengths to ensure, to raise that issue with the government. Several speeches within the Dáil. He's in WhatsApp groups. He's emailing people. I've seen it because my friend has showed me the communications. Like, he has done serious amount of work. Him and quite a few of these other politicians who would be considered of the left. Ivana Bacik has also been involved in it. Breed Smith to an extent as well. And would have been some other independents as well. Some of, again, who would be considered more so of the left side of the dialectic, if you wish. And what I'm seeing there is, but Paul Murphy is the most significant person that comes to mind there, who is looking out for mostly Irish people there, all right? And And it's not something you might have expected, because if you think of Paul Murphy, I mean, in national circles, Paul Murphy doesn't have a good reputation. He's considered as someone, people would call him anti-Irish. People would say he doesn't care about Irish people, and that he's throwing Irish people under the bus. And there are certainly times when you can see that kind of dynamic at play, where it seems like he doesn't give a damn about Irish people, and especially in terms of mass immigration and so on, where he seems to not really care about the impacts on ordinary Irish people, ordinary working class and middle class Irish people. And yet here he is, really going to serious lengths to look out for what is predominantly Irish people in this situation they're in, which is of no fault of their own, a situation created by Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, really, maybe to an extent Labour and Green as well, going back to years. But then you see what's going on there. What is going on there? Look at what's going on there. Who is the underdog here? The underdog are the apartment owners, all right? And the fact that they're mostly Irish, in a way, is neither here nor there, because who is the more privileged party within that dialectic? Well, it's the well-off property developers, the builders, It's the people who are involved, the companies who are involved, the construction companies. These are the people who are involved in, building these apartments and not giving a damn in terms of, the proper standards for these apartments, ensuring the fire safety standards were at the right level, They didn't care, okay? And they didn't care because the governments hadn't ensured that the proper procedures were in place there for them. So it was this kind of light touch regulation, which the likes of Bertie Ahern, championed, And that's what led to this situation. And, the property developers and builders and the construction companies really took advantage of that, and recklessly went ahead and built those apartments, tens of thousands of apartments around Ireland, without really caring about people who would be owning those apartments and would buy those apartments and would own those apartments, So who are the more privileged people within that paradigm? It is the well-off property developers, the well-off construction companies, the builders who are making coin out of this as well, and the government as well, of course, who were the ones who would have been involved in setting in place the, or not setting in place, you could say, the proper legal restrictions, and standards for these apartments, that the builders and construction companies and the property developers would have had to adhere to. So within that, it's no surprise, you could say then, that Paul Murphy aligns with the underdog, who just happen to be mostly Irish people in this situation. But you can see that's an example of where that kind of thinking, the underdog fallacy, the oppressor-oppressed dialectic, lends itself to looking out for mostly Irish people in this situation. But like I said, that's neither here nor there, The fact is that in a lot of issues, what's perceived to be the less privileged or the more oppressed party within this dialectic is often a minority. It's often an immigrant. It's often a refugee or an asylum seeker or a Muslim person or a gay person or something like that. But anyway, look, I just wanted to introduce that concept to you, and it explains why we see certain people, like Paul Murphy, for instance, sometimes, doing good by Irish people, sometimes really looking out for Irish people. But in a way, it's almost by accident, If it wasn't for the nature of that situation with the apartments, his first concern would not necessarily be looking out for Irish people. But in this case, in this scenario, that's what it turns out to be. But I would also say, don't also jump to conclusions. So automatically think that the politicians who would call themselves of the left, don't automatically assume at the same time that they never care about Irish people or they never look out for them. A lot of them are a little bit kind of caught in that way of thinking. A lot of them are indoctrinated, you could say, and it's, I don't know, I'm not quite sure how we deal with this, but I just want to explain what that is, what that dynamic is, and it explains why you have situations where people like Paul Murphy can sometimes do a lot of good for Irish people, and in other situations end up essentially throwing Irish people under the bus. But there you go.